No sooner had Athens reformed its political system than they were threatened by an external foe, the Persians. You should recall that Cyrus had conquered Lydia in 546 BC, bringing his state to the borders of Greece and imposing his rule over Ionia. These Ionians rebelled against Persia in 499 and sought mainland Greek support. Perhaps unwisely, Athens sent support to the Ionians and raided the Persian provincial capital of Sardis. The Athenians did not remain in Ionia, and Darius regained control over Ionia by 494. The Persians did not forget the Athenian intervention, and they planned an invasion of Greece in retaliation. In 490 BC, a 25,000-man strong Persian naval force under the command of Darius entered Greece. The badly outnumbered Athenians, who had maybe 10,000 men, managed to defeat the Persians at the Battle of Marathon, some 26 miles from Athens. A herald ran the entire distance from Marathon to Athens to announce the shocking victory, hence the endurance race known as a marathon. 10 years later, Darius' successor Xerxes launched a second invasion overland with a substantially larger army and a huge accompanying fleet. Most of the Greek police felt that this was Athens' fight and remained neutral, granting the Persians access to the Greek mainland. Athens did assemble a few allies, most significantly the Spartans, who agreed to fight the Persians with the armies of the Peloponnesian League. A detachment of Spartans made an astonishing and daring stand against the Persians at the mountain pass of Thermopylae in central Greece, but they were eventually killed to a man. The Athenians abandoned their city in terror. They evacuated the population by ship to nearby islands, on the advice of the famed orator Themistocles. Xerxes sacked and burned Athens, then found the Greek fleet. The haughty Persians attacked the fleet, but they were led into a trap in the narrow Strait of Salamis. They could not maneuver properly or bring their numbers to bear, while the smaller, mobile Greek fleet was able to attack at will, and ultimately the Greek fleet crushed the Persian fleet. Xerxes left Greece at the end of 480, but the remaining Persian army was cut off without its fleet and couldn't receive supplies. Thus the isolated Persian army was defeated by the Spartan-led Greek army at the Battle of Plataea the next year, in 479. The Persians had been defeated, the Greeks were triumphant, and the Ionian cities rebelled again. Despite the fact that the Persians had been soundly defeated, it wasn't a sure thing that they wouldn't attack again. Themistocles persuaded Athens to surround the city with walls that would also connect the city to its port at Piraeus. So long as the walls stood, Athens would have a secure supply line to the sea through its port. Athens also saw the advantages that Sparta reaped from its alliance, the Peloponnesian League, and formed its own, known as the Delian League. This was a naval alliance, unlike Sparta's infantry-based alliance. It was called the Delian League because when it was founded in 478, the treasury was located on the island of Delos. At its height, it included over 100 polis, including most of the shore of the Aegean Sea, most of the Aegean Islands, and Ionia. You can see the members on the map I provided. Athens provided most of the ships for the League, while the other members provided the money to supply and maintain the fleet. This fleet patrolled the Aegean to defend against the Persians, and frequently raided the Persian coast in Anatolia. The Delian League was important to Athens, for defense, for the money that was paid for the maintenance of the fleet, and because Athens began siphoning off funds to pay government officials and for city beautification projects. In 467, the Delian League fleet carried out a particularly successful raid, convincing some of the members that the League was no longer necessary. The annual dues were high, and it was apparent that Athens was profiting from the association. In 465, however, when the Polis of Thasos attempted to leave the League, Athens attacked the city, tore down its walls, and confiscated the city's remaining fleet and property. Other cities met the same fate. The Delian League had been transformed into the Athenian Empire, and this became obvious when Pericles moved the treasury from Delos to Athens in 454. The major Athenian politician of this era was Pericles, who lived between 495 and 429 BC. He so dominated the times that this period has been called the Age of Pericles. It was Pericles who had the Delian treasury moved to Athens. Pericles was both an imperialist and a democrat. His imperialism is shown by his appropriation of the Delian League into the Athenian Empire. In the political arena, he continued and expanded Cleisthenes' reforms. Pericles was convinced that the common men that served Athens so valiantly in the wars against Persia ought to gain political rights as well. In 461, Pericles helped begin the effort to reduce the power of the Areopagus by creating a series of courts below the Areopagus. These would be the people's courts that would render decisions on cases previously determined by the nobility. Most importantly, Pericles agitated for office holders to receive pay. This made it possible for poor citizens to participate in government. Although they had not been officially barred from office holding, they couldn't afford to do the duties without pay. Pericles himself was an aristocrat, but the people saw his reforms and regularly elected him to the office of general and approved his reforms. Pericles oversaw the rebuilding of Athens after its burning by Xerxes. The greatest of his achievements was the building of the Parthenon, a temple to Athena, pictured here on the hill called the Acropolis. This image has defined the city ever since. There is a paradox involving Pericles' rule over Athens. For one thing, never before in history had so many people, poor as well as rich, participated actively in government. On the other hand, the city's wealth that enabled the salaries for public officials, which allowed the poor to participate, was gained from imperial tribute from the former Delian League states. Therefore, democracy and imperialism were linked. As I will discuss in greater detail in just a minute, those who enjoyed these political privileges were also a minority of the people living in Athens. Women couldn't participate, and neither could resident aliens, known as metics. Metics had to pay taxes and fight for Athens, but there was no naturalization of citizenship in ancient Athens, meaning you could not become a citizen if you weren't born one. Also, slavery was widespread. Perhaps a third of the population of Athens was made up of slaves. All in all, only about a quarter of the inhabitants of Athens actually participated in the democracy. Women in many Greek city-states were protected by the law. In many cases, they were counted as citizens for legal, social, and religious, but not political purposes. Women couldn't participate politically because Greeks generally believed that female judgment was inferior to male judgment. There were also stricter regulations controlling females, such as the fact that female sexual behavior was rather circumscribed. Women also had tighter property laws, although they could inherit property and control their dowry. Women did enjoy the legal protections against being sold into slavery. They could also appear in court for property disputes, although they did need to appoint a male guardian to speak for them. Greek society was generally paternalistic, and Greek women were always under the legal control of a guardian. Before her marriage, her guardian was her father. Marriage made her husband her legal guardian. At the same time, bearing a male was a special honor for a woman, because this provided security for their future as an advocate. In 451, Pericles sponsored a law making citizenship exclusive. Only the children of 2 Athenian citizens were citizens, not the children of 1 Athenian citizen with a non-citizen. Pericles' aggressive imperialism may have enriched Athens, but it also led to the destabilization of the Greek world. Greece effectively divided into 2 armed camps, the Peloponnesian League that excelled in land combat, and the Delian League/Athenian Empire that was expert in naval combat. Feeling that a war was inevitable, the Spartans struck first in 431, claiming as a pretext a dispute between Greek colonies in the west. The Spartans hoped to bring the Athenians to a decisive battle and crush them, but Pericles refused to fight them, recognizing the Spartans' advantage. Athens, remember, had built walls connecting them to their port in the sea beyond, and were therefore able to import food even though the Spartans angrily destroyed the farms beyond their walls. Pericles had thought that the Spartans would break off their attack, but instead the Spartans remained for years, raiding Athenian lands. Then, in 430, a plague struck the cramped conditions inside Athens, ultimately killing a quarter of the Athenian population, including Pericles in 429. The name of this conflict between Athens and her allies, and Sparta and her allies, is the Peloponnesian War. A brief truce was declared at one point, but this was shortly broken, and the war would rage for 30 years. Pericles' death left Athens leaderless and opened to all sorts of influences. The most notorious was Pericles' nephew Alcibiades, who reignited the war in 415 by invading Sicily, one of Sparta's allies. This expedition ended in disaster in 413, partly because some Athenian politicians turned on Alcibiades, and Alcibiades in turn turned on them and aided the Spartans, whom he had just attacked. Many of Athens' allies abandoned the city at this point, and democracy was even briefly abandoned in favor of oligarchy in 411. Things then got even worse for Athens, because Persia began to fund the Spartan effort, allowing the Spartans to build up a navy that could rival the Athenians. Eventually, Athens surrendered in 404 BC. The city's walls were torn down, the fleet was disbanded, and they were forbidden from reviving their empire. Democracy was again eliminated, and a group of aristocrats who were friendly to Sparta, known as the 30 Tyrants, were installed. The defeat of Athens ends the classical period of Greek history, and the culture of Greece began to decline.